Hello everyone. Among the flaws of human authors, which, with a modicum of cynicism, paint the epidemic of AI authors in a better light, there is another, more pressing flaw, which has been the bane of a few of the most best-selling fiction book series of all time. The potential controversy of human authors compelling us to question whether we should indulge in death of the author, separating the art from the artist, and AI authors, is something we are not presently interested in discussing, lest it is mistakenly implied this is the only reason readers might deign to indulge. In this day and age of artificial intelligence, it can be discussed ad nauseum if art can be appreciated without a human artist having made it. Except, there is one way we definitely cannot enjoy the art from a human artist, and that is when the artist never finishes the art and the author never finishes the book or the book series, and therefore never brings the story with its thematic resonance, satisfying world building, economic potential, and cultural inspiration to anything resembling a culmination and ending. Unlike the issue of the AI threat to creative writing, the onus to solve this issue is not on the readers in any shape or form. It is absolutely on the author. Now, as snappy of a line it would be to say that the authors started it, so it is for them to end it, it would not be entirely realistic. Human authors are just that, human. They may become predisposed to any manner of things life throws at them: parenthood, grandparenthood, old age, illness, addiction, fatigue, depression, anxiety, loss of enthusiasm, or a change of enthusiasm, a tectonic shift in their values and what they invest their time in. All of these may generate sympathy, but none of them, besides death, excuse the lack of transparency of a situation which causes the long-awaited continuation of a story to never be written. Now, of course, there will be a focus on George R.R. Martin, author of the book series A Song of Ice and Fire, whose television adaptation is HBO's Game of Thrones. It is one of my most beloved book series, and I am by no means unique in that respect. Therefore, it is emblematic of a larger cultural issue, despite it perhaps not actually being the most long-running or egregious example. In any case, we as a culture are running out of time to set a standard on how to expeditiously resolve this issue, as the AI threat is looming. Authors who have written themselves into this predicament cannot keep kicking the can down the road. If prolific authors never finish their stories, then AI large language models, used by disgruntled yet passionate fans with no moral scruple with the technology, will. In fact, it is already happening, and I don't think it's a coincidence that George R.R. Martin is included in the list of authors who are suing AI companies for learning from their books. Do authors owe us, the readers, completed stories in the form of a book series? Before we delve any further and rush to a conclusion, because of the existential threat of AI, we must cast our minds back to a simpler time, when readers had no other recourse but to wait, and wait, and wait, and wait. Authors would not be where they are today without their readers. However, it's also true that they don't necessarily automatically owe the readers anything. But what does it truly mean to owe, to be indebted to so many people at once, in such a way that is noticeably parasocial? Such a debt to a dedicated reader base is not a litigious truth. It is not legally binding that an author must finish a series of novels, so long as the transaction for each individual book is fulfilled with the delivery of the materials to the consumer. With that said, there is an honour system in this cultural relationship between author and reader that cannot be ignored. If you read a book that spends so much time setting up payoffs to happen in future books, with a narrative through line that is becoming bloated to the point where the potential is bursting at the seams, it is an exciting source of escapism, and equally lucrative for the author. The issue impends when the growing potential of the saga is used as a unique selling point of the book series, especially when it is paradoxically sold as a complete box set prematurely. Transactionally, the author has done nothing but provide a product for the consumer, while, in fairness and in most cases, delivering an isolated, completed story arc and payoff to at least one of the setups within each given book. Something which is also true for other authors in this same predicament, beyond just George R.R. Martin. As of making this video, over 5,430 days have passed since the release of A Dance with Dragons, the most recent book in A Song of Ice and Fire. It is possible that The Winds of Winter actually releases from here on, less likely nigh impossible for the final book, A Dream of Spring. So in avoiding to have this video age poorly, it's time to ask the question broadly. I do think the author owes the readers a completed story, subjectively that is, as I believe some gratitude should come from up to millions of people reading your stories and buying each installment. Long-running sci-fi fantasy series make their intentions clear as a saga. This leads one to believe that readers will be more likely to invest their time into reading a book if it catches them up with the zeitgeist, so they can be a part of the conversation when future books release in the series. Literary publishing houses and/or their authors are clearly banking on this phenomenon, which is why it comes across as slimy when they suddenly evoke the cynical, merely technical fact that there is only a creator-consumer transaction occurring, and have become obviously bitter and resentful when being criticised for taking too long to release a sequel, a stark but not necessarily natural contrast from basking in the celebrity of being a successive, best-selling author. There is a snowball effect that occurs when a series of books is praised for its expansive, complicated and multi-threaded storylines, because the author will lean into what is being praised. A counterproductive way of creating something, perhaps, since it diverts from the original intention and instead is marked by a reactionary urge to please the same audience they will later resent for them wanting fulfillment on the manifold setups they have yet to pay off.
But it was going to be 3 books, Game of Thrones, A Dance with Dragons, The Winds of Winter. Those were your 3 original titles. My original projection was 3 books of about 800 manuscript pages each, and no end was in sight. And by the time I hit like 1,400 pages and still no end was in sight, I said, maybe it's 4 books.
Play the game.
And yeah, at a certain point, though, I realized, well, 4 books. 4 books is not going to be 4 books. It's going to be 6 books. I said 6 for a long time. And Paris, my wife, who was then my girlfriend, would attend these things with me, and people would ask me how long the series is going to be, and I would say 6 books. And behind me, she would be holding up 7 fingers.
It is commonplace for authors to start off with a reserved, conservative estimation of how many books will be in their series. A Song of Ice and Fire started off as an intended trilogy, before ending up being a firmly planned, repeatedly referenced 7-book lineup. This is not to suggest the retroactive bloating of book sagas is always due to audience capture. After all, George R.R. Martin cites the fact that there are 7 gods and 7 kingdoms in Westeros, which is perhaps not a good reason in its own right either. But this captures the same idealism and whimsy of hyping the reader base for an unprecedentedly expansive saga, only to pull the rug from underneath them, bait and switch, and suddenly go AWOL, either creating nothing, or producing only side projects tangential to what their core fanbase actually wants from them. Not as human beings, but as a brand. Authors should curb their enthusiasm, with foresight that they may not be able to fulfill the enthusiasm of millions of fans. I believe authors should appeal to their status as a mere mortal with finite time and energy from the beginning, when the excited hemisphere of their creative mind is telling them to overwrite. Instead of appealing to that same humble humanity to their fans when they've written themselves into quite the opposite of a corner, in this case, but a dark, creative, cognitive, agoraphobic void, In this sense, the fans are just the manifestation of their unmoderated enthusiasm present from the very beginning, when nobody knew their name or their stories. That enthusiasm does not just vanish because they, as the author, lost it. It is transmitted and disseminated among millions of readers. Even if George R. R. Martin wins the lawsuit against AI companies, which he definitely should, it will not help or even address the problem which incentivized fans to generate the Winds of Winter with AI in the first place. In essence, I believe it mostly hinges upon how the series of books is advertised to the readers. Authors don't necessarily have to put themselves through the humiliation ritual of updating their devotees that they bit off more than they could chew and wasted everyone's time. Especially when they are adamant that they do not want someone else to finish their stories after they are deceased. Nevertheless, while I subjectively think authors do owe their readers a completed story, with the caveat that not fulfilling on what was owed in this case is hardly a sin and doesn't make the author a bad person, I do, however, objectively think authors owe the readers transparency regarding the true status of unfinished works, and I would even go as far to say it should be treated the same way as false advertising is punished. I'm not saying that they should have to rebrand the box set of A Song of Ice and Fire like it's the unfinished tales of Tolkien. I just think they should stop upselling on the idea of potential that would not be fulfilled. To be honest, I wish the publishers would release a box set but leave room for 2 books, just to make a point to George. Now, we will most likely never get that transparency, because if George R. R. Martin came out with the truth, publishing houses and production studios would be forgiven for believing that the interest in the series would dwindle and the transmedia projects of A Song of Ice and Fire, whose studios have invested hundreds of millions of dollars into them, would suffer to varying degrees. Albeit, any damage to the brand might have already been done by the abysmal final season of HBO's Game of Thrones, and thus far, most impressively, it seems to have regained a footing in pop culture with House of the Dragon and A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. So maybe the idea of the books never being finished would not be as apocalyptic for the IP as we may first assume. Still, it's possible that George R. R. Martin might have it in his contract that he must not do or say anything to devalue the IP, and that might include never being transparent about the status of Winds of Winter. Despite that speculation, to bring us back around to the death of the author, art-artist separation, and AI authors, we can only ignore the state of affairs in this future we live in for so long. Chiefly, as has been established, artificial intelligence has a great impact on the notion of authors being indebted to their readers, specifically for unfinished stories lacking an ending. The ability for fans to simply feed all of A Song of Ice and Fire to a large language model, and the recorded examples of some of them enacting on that potential, shines a light on the true frustration of the readers. One might be persuaded by the death of the author, but for an unnatural reason, brute forcing their way to a future wherein their beloved series is finished, undermining the original authorial intent and reducing it to mere plastic probability. They might suddenly decide to separate the art from the artist, in this case, their previous moral discomforts dissolved, for they have created or accessed a version of the ending that was never written by or profited from the author or artist. The way these 3 concepts, death of the author, art separation, and AI authors interact with each other in the emotion and intellect of the reader is marked by a pervasive volatility. To me personally, there is no obvious antidote to this chaos. If there is a cultural path through, it is incredibly narrow. However, we can diagnose the cause of the cultural frustration in the first place and try to prevent it. It is, when all is said and done, all down to transparency. What might be the ultimate preventative measure for AI is gratitude and respect from the author, a clear message that while he enjoyed the creative journey as a human being, his passion for storytelling overcame his human limitations. Perhaps an author should not be so close-minded as to suggest that if a human writes it, it will be themselves or nobody. Unlike Robert Jordan, who gave blessing for his books to be finished by someone else. Unlike Frank Herbert, whose son has continued writing stories in his genre-defining sci-fi world. Some authors who are being criticised for not finishing their stories seem to value the personal celebrity and achievement more than the art of storytelling and the furtherance of an expansive, culturally important story beyond their mortal coil. If stories are not shared and inherited from human to human through generations of legacy and posterity, it will be reaped by artificial intelligence, used by fans who have the passion to continue these stories, yet not necessarily the talent, nor the legal standing to do so. Strictly speaking, authors only owe the readers transparency, but they owe it to their stories, their characters, their themes, to allow their creations to live beyond their aspirations, even if it means they are not the ones to finish it. This, of course, carries the risk of a corporation getting their hands on it and trying to finish a story that was already finished. But this is a compromise we will have to live with.